So welcome everybody. Wake up. You've got a wonderful guest. Kim Ayala is with us today. Kim, for those who don't know, actually did the Capital 10,000 with us this last Sunday. It's a true inspiration. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about his why as to why he did that and everything. Kim, we were just talking originally from Houston, homeboys from Cypress, Texas. So where I used to live out there also. Recent Boston. Yeah, be eating everybody. So please mute your microphones. Menaki is tuning in. Is that me? Okay. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Cam. There's Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Alrighty, so I'm going to start by saying howdy, not just because this is Texas, but I'm also a Texas A&M Aggie here in Austin, so I'm probably getting some boos. That's fine. I'm a tuber center anyway. So, yes, it is an honor to be here for Limb Difference Awareness Month. It's really cool because I was also born with lymphedema, which I'll get into here shortly, and Lymphedema Awareness Month is in April. Or is in March, sorry. So March to April, I stay pretty busy with just different advocacy and speaking engagements of that. So, nice. Got the prosthetic emoji. Cool. Okay, there you go. Sweet. So, you'll see as I kind of tell my story, it is hashtag complicated. Like if my life was a ringtone, it would be complicated by Avril Lavigne. So what I really want to talk about is what my journey has been like post amputation and what it's been like, navigating the world of prosthetics, adaptive sports, advocacy, dating, like all the ins and outs of what kind of a day in the life of someone with limb loss is. So to paint the picture, let's go back to the year 2000. That's me right there. Number 19, that was playing local sports, kind of like YMCA basketball. And I was a three-sport athlete, baseball, basketball, and football. And really, we noticed that something was up with me when I was age 11 playing that summer league basketball. As I was going up and down the basketball court, the coaches and the parents were like, is Cam okay? Because it looks like he's kind of like almost like galloping and limping as he's running up and down the court. And so, as you can see, I was one of the taller ones for my age, and my parents just chalked it up. Oh, that's just growing pains. Take some Tylenol, a hot shower, you'll be fine. But as the season progressed, my lower back pain got worse and worse. And one night, my dad was like, hey, just lay down for a second. I want to see something. And he got a measuring tape, and he was able to identify that my right leg was actually about 1.5 inches shorter than my left. So that leg length discrepancy would give us a reason to say, okay, that's why he's limping, and that's why you're having all that in one shoe off. So what that then led us to do is to go to some orthopedic specialists. So we can advance next. So living in Houston is a pretty big blessing in the year 2000, 2001, because again, this is really when the internet was still in its infancy. We couldn't just Google things. We couldn't do WebMD. You couldn't go down that rabbit hole, right? It was basically dial up. AOL, you got mail, for those who remember those good old days. And, living in Houston, there was always accessibility to some of the top medical specialists, but even still having that accessibility to them, it took over a year of seeing dozens of specialists to finally get diagnosed with the disease that I have called lymphedema. From a show of hands here in the room, who's heard of lymphedema before? Couple? Okay. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview. So in essence, we all have a lymphatic system, right? And you guys may have heard, like, when you have a sore throat, you say, oh, my lymph nodes are swollen, right? Or maybe you have a loved one who was diagnosed with breast cancer, for example, and they do lymph node dissections, or would they do a mastectomy, right? And so there's really two types of lymphedema. There's the congenital primary side where you're born with it, and then there's secondary, which is secondary to some sort of trauma like cancer, and that's the most common one is secondary. I, however, fell into the category of the much more rare, which was primary. And so essentially you can see, like, in the pelvic area and the lymphatics of the lower limb, essentially what was happening to me is when that lymphatic fluid was trying to drain going from distal to proximal, what would happen was it would get caught up in my pelvic area and then backflow, almost like for the Austinites, it's like being caught on I-35 remote pag. Terrible traffic jam. And like, no matter what you do, the cars aren't moving. Or in my case, that lymphatic fluid wasn't moving. And another way I try to describe it to people who've never heard of lymphedema is if you'd ever rolled or sprained your ankle, you know how it like almost instantaneously starts to swell? And the doctors will say, hey, use compression, use elevation, right? And that kind of gets the swelling down. Well, picture your whole leg swelling like every single day, and it's really painful, and there's no cure for it. It's a chronic and progressive disease state. So there I was, 11 years old, and when I went to that orthopedic doctor, he initially thought that I had bone cancer because they did some x-rays, they saw some spots on the bone, and they're like, hey, something's up here. And so when they did a bone biopsy, it was really post-operatively after that minor bone biopsy that we were able to rule out osteosarcoma, thank goodness. But that's when the swelling got worse and worse. And most of you have had any kind of orthopedic procedure, whether it's, meniscus tear, ACL, or even a knee replacement, there's going to be post-operative swelling. That's just kind of par for the course. But the way in which mine was progressing, it just got worse and worse over time. And exercise wasn't helping. Physical therapy wasn't helping. So that's what kind of led us down a rabbit hole of seeing all the specialty doctors where they finally said, oh, yes, you have primary lymphedema. Now, the thing that sucked about that was they basically handed me a trifold brochure. And how many of you have seen the show My 600-Pound Life? Like Dr. Now, right? You see a lot of those patients who have secondary lymphedema due to their morbid obesity. And there gets certain stages of lymphedema where it's irreversible. And so for me, being 11 years old, having these dreams of aspiration of playing varsity basketball, NCAA basketball, and even NBA basketball, I see this image of these poor patients whose extremities were swollen to the point where it gets to a phase where it's called elephantitis, which is like the worst name ever because their legs or their arms literally looks like that of an elephant's. And so I was told that, hey, this disease is chronic and progressive and there's no cure for it. And here's these bullet points of all these activities that I had to avoid. Avoid bug bites, avoid scrapes and abrasions, avoid bruising, avoid high heat. I'm like, I live in Houston, Texas, arguably the mosquito capital of the world, hotter than hell. And I played 3 sports that are very much contact where at any given time, I could have a mosquito bite, a bruise, a break, all that in one practice for football or baseball, for example. So it was really in that point where I was faced with the decision, okay, am I going to allow this diagnosis of lymphedema to control the trajectory of my life? Or am I going to, for lack of better words, man up, put that hard work into play and not allow this disease state to define me? So at 11 years old, I was really forced to make that mature decision. And again, this was before social media. I never knew any other lymphedema patients. And as I was mentioning earlier, most of the lymphedema patient population skews female and skews upper extremity due to breast cancer. So I never saw another teenager boy that was thriving playing junior high or varsity sports. I never saw an adult male who was living an active life, someone that I could look up to. Instead, it was that tried old brochure of like, do you have lymphedema? What's next? So one of the other complications that can happen with lymphedema is chronic reoccurrence of infection. Most commonly, it's cellulitis, where it's just kind of a skin irritation that can be triaged pretty quickly with oral antibiotics. But however, it can progress to something more severe, which is osteomyelitis, which is chronic infection of bone. And that's what I started to experience with my first bout here in July of 2014. I was living here in Austin. I was in the advertising industry. I was taking a client out for happy hour. And when I got out of my truck, as soon as I put my right leg down, like my knee locked up and it was just like 10 out of 10 pain. Started running a fever. And I told my roommate at the time, I said, man, like, I think I have a blood clot or I think I'm like having a stroke. Like, I don't know, we need to go to the emergency room. So that led to this reoccurrence of, next slide, please. Again, I told you I'm #complicated. We're not going to go here and do the minutia of my entire medical timeline. And this is just a little pro tip for anybody else who has chronic disease or has a very complicated health history. I put this together myself because I have been all over the United States. I've been to the Cleveland Clinic. I've been to the Mayo Clinic. I've been to a lot of the hospitals here in Austin when I lived here. And you go there and you fill out your new patient paperwork and they give you like 2 lines. Have you had any recent surgeries? I'm like, see attached PDF. And so, as you can see, really in 2014, as we move our way down to 2021, it has just been this ebb and flow of like, okay, I'm good, but then I have another random bout of infection in the knee joint. I'm back in the operating room. I'm back in physical therapy. 2 steps forward, 30 steps back. And so, I was fortunate enough to play college basketball my freshman year at a small D2 school. So like I got to check that off the bucket list. But when I moved to Austin and eventually to Los Angeles, I was more like focused on the social elements of life and didn't really put as much energy and effort into maintaining the daily activities I needed to keep the lymphedema under control. So this is where the social part gets another fun little turn. So in 2019, I was living here in Austin and I got out of a relationship and I thought, well, what is something crazy I could do that was not a dating app, that was not a blind date with, a friend of a friend. Instead, I went on ABC's The Bachelorette. So that's me with Hannah Brown. She was the Bachelorette for that season. And, the whole like expectations versus reality. Well, before we get to the next slide, that was my television debut. That was at the finale of Colton Underwood, who was the previous Bachelor. And so that was the night they announced Hannah to be the Bachelorette. And so they had this little preview where they let 5 of the 20 contestants like get a head start 2 days before we moved into the Bachelor Mansion to basically meet her, this, that, and the other. So I busted a little freestyle rap. I'm not going to repeat it. Anyway, I did that. And ended up getting the rose that night, which had never happened in Bachelor Nation history to guard it. So as you can imagine, that made my ego go from here to about there, but also put a huge target on my back. Next slide. So the reality is I became one of the most notorious villains in Bachelor Nation. And, I could laugh about it now, but basically, as you can see there, me sitting with Hannah, I was telling her about my struggles with lymphedema. I was like, look, there was a point in time in 2016 where the doctor said, hey, with these reoccurrences of infection, you may lose your leg in the future. And when you're in that environment, and there's and at the time I was 30 years old, and there was guys in their mid 20s who had these crazy ripped bodies. Like Tyler Cameron was on my episode, but women are obsessed with him. And so I'm like, Hannah, I'm telling you right now, I have a very different strength than some of these other guys. I live with a chronic disease, and there may come a time where I may lose my leg. So if we're taking this whole process seriously, when the cameras aren't rolling, and if we're exchanging wedding vows and we're saying it's sickness and in health, I need to know that you're somebody who can handle being with someone with a chronic disease. And, unfortunately, that was still relatively early on in the season, and reality TV, the fuel behind it is drawn. So I trusted in the producers that they were going to handle that conversation delicately. And unfortunately, they told another guy in the mansion that, hey, Cam just made up this medical sob story so Hannah would feel sorry for him. We need you to go rescue her. So basically, this other guy comes in and, rescues her from me, telling her this because he thought that I was going to be sent home and I was just using this as a last-ditch effort to stay in the competition. So she pulls me over and says, Cam, I need to talk. So fellas, when a woman tells you that, it's hopefully not a good thing. And so she goes, I appreciate you opening up, but at the same time, it just feels very calculated and slimy, and I need to think about it. Fast forward, I got sent home that night. And when you're in that environment, you signed NDAs. I couldn't go out and publicly defend my character. And what really sucked about that environment was that when the episode aired, they completely edited out me talking about my lymphedema. They cut and spliced the conversation to perpetuate this villain narrative because that's what the show fuels on. The drama. And so what does that do to my mental health? When you go online and you see these things like in Cosmo and People magazine, like one of the top villains of all time. And then I can't even tell you the amount of direct messages I got on my social media, things ranging from death threats to just like really, really attacking my character. And you guys know imposter syndrome, right? Y'all heard of that in some capacity, right? Where you don't feel you're worthy of eligible of, certain accolades or promotions that you have earned. Well, I developed a term. I had reverse imposter syndrome. I started to believe the lies in this persona that complete strangers were saying about me. So, as you can tell, I have trust issues with people. Next slide. People magazine, that is. So the same media outlets who a couple years prior were calling me one of the worst villains in Bachelor Nation history, all of a sudden are seeing a very different story, a very different narrative when I started collaborating with Cappy Bates, who is just an awesome human being. She also has lymphedema. And so I started volunteering with the lymphatic nonprofit. And so her and I got to meet and share our experiences. And, on paper, we're very different. She's a relatively older female with upper extremity lymphedema due to cancer, whereas I was a relatively younger male, lower extremity lymphedema patient because I have primary. So very different presentations of the disease state, but at the same time, we had the same mission and goal and purpose, which was to bring awareness to ultimately increase funding and increase the research so we could inevitably find a cure for this disease. So what led to the amputation? So I'll just quickly go through that. So as I was recovering from all the surgeries, I was just exhausted. By 2021, I had had over 17 surgeries on my right knee due to the infection. And again, I mentioned I had been all over the United States. I wasn't just, staying in my local area. And really the only consensus we could come to that would potentially, work for limb salvage was to do a total knee replacement. So in 2021, I had the total knee replacement surgery in Houston. And unfortunately, about 11 months post-op, I'm going through physical therapy. I feel like I had a pretty good pain tolerance because of all my other operations and being a former athlete. It's like, no pain, no gain. That couldn't be further from the truth when you're recovering from certain surgeries, right? Pain is telling us something. Hey, there's something up here. So went to another orthopedic surgeon to get a second opinion. And when he took the x-rays, he's like, hey, who did your surgery? And I mentioned the individual's name. He's like, oh no, that individual's a great trauma surgeon, but he/she, not going to out that individual, for lack of better words, botched it. It was the wrong hardware, and it was positioned wrong on my femur. So I could only bend my right leg about 45 degrees post-op for 11 months. And I had this huge jack bodybuilder of a physical therapist. And at the end of every single PT session, he would do a force manipulation where he would bend it. And I had the little code word. I said, hey, Dr. Clay, go grab the towel. So I put the towel over my head, roll the other end of the ball, and I would just bite into it. And it turns out every time he was force bending the leg, it was pulling the hardware out of the thumb. So then I was faced with the decision, meeting with that other orthopedic surgeon. He said, Cam, you have two options. Option number one is we can do a revision to the total knee replacement. We're going to have to remove the existing hardware in there. We're going to have to put a temporary cement spacer in there for a couple months to make sure the bacteria and there's no presence of infection. And then we're going to have to come back a few months later and we're going to have to put larger hardware in there. That's going to go higher up in your femur and lower down into your tib fib. And by the way, if at any point in time the infection comes back, we're going to have to amputate. And if we go that route, the amputation site's going to be much higher up because of how we have to place the hardware. I said, okay, well, what's option number two? We said, well, behind door number two is we can do an elective above knee amputation right now. And so when you get that as your two options, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, well, it feels like if I do the revision, I'm almost in essence delaying the inevitable of amputation. And for it to be much higher up, I know just from doing a little bit of research and talking with other AKs on Instagram, for example, that you want as long of a residual end as possible for socket fit and for functionality. So after consulting other doctors, and a lot of time in prayer and with my family, and then again, the positive side of social media, I got to connect with a lot of other men around my age who are above me and getting to see how they're thriving in their lives post amputation, getting to have some Zoom conversations with them prior to making that decision gave me peace of mind and gave me ultimately hope that I can move forward and that there's not just life after limb loss, there is a beautiful life after limb loss. Move forward with the amputation. And so on June 22nd of 2022, we proceeded with the above knee amputation. So what I want to talk to you guys about is how my life has been post amputation. And whether you're tuning in online or here in person, I think this is really relevant for the kind of work that you guys are doing. I'm actually in the medical device sales space myself, and I'll get into that here shortly. But what you guys do matters. I think it matters more than you can comprehend. You may not be living with limb loss or limb difference yourself, but you may have a loved one, or just working for this company, you get to meet patients such as myself and my friend Jenny, who was here last week, and all the other amazing Ottobock ambassadors. So this was last year actually. I got to do an interview with Living with Amplitude magazine, and it was my 1 year ampuversary. And you really learn a lot in that first year as an individual with limb loss. You know, you're navigating the prosthetic part, you're dealing with your new body, you're trying to find your place in the community. And, you know, for me, I'm a pretty big extrovert, but like I realized that, hey, there's seasons in our lives where you need to grieve on your own or in a much smaller setting. I unfortunately didn't really have that luxury, because once I had my amputation and I did one post on my Instagram, all of those media outlets, again, who were throwing me under the bus 4 years prior, coming back and wanting to tell a completely different story. So for me, one of the most important parts of my recovery and my journey as someone with limb loss is getting back to the community. And I'm now a certified peer visitor with the Amputee Coalition. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what that entails, I had to go through a pretty rigorous training and certification process. So now I can go into pretty much any hospital in the state of Texas and mentor someone who is either about to go through limb loss or is recovering from that, and just give them encouragement, give them motivation, and give them research and other resources to navigate this journey a little easier. And then you can see over there, that's my buddy James Dixon. We started a podcast, I think that was 2 months after my amputation. I just wanted to get out and shout it from the rooftops. And the reason we call it Above and Below is I'm an above the knee and he's a below the knee. And so we have two very different stories, but there's still a lot of the Venn diagram. There's so much cohesiveness. I call it a limb diagram. Our limb diagram interselected platforms to raise up other amputees and people with limb difference to share their testimonies and their stories. So, I call this slide Breaking Individual Barriers because I know I was talking to some other people last week about this. When you're someone like me who became an amputee at age 34, there was this almost immense pressure that I put on myself to be a Paralympic athlete. And we know that that is such a small subset of the population of people with limb loss or limb difference that though I have a tremendous amount of respect for those individuals who are Paralympic athletes, for me, it was an unhealthy expectation, because for me, it was like my old high school and college competitive nature coming out, where it almost felt binary. Like you're either a Paralympic athlete or you're underachieving as someone with limb loss or limb difference. And so that can be a very dangerous place to be. Now, thank goodness we do have these amazing athletes that can show us kind of the art of what's possible. And for me, what did that look like? Well, in Houston, they have a lot of really great adaptive sports clinics. So I got to go to some running clinics. I got to attempt wheelchair basketball, which was a bit of a nightmare for me and one of the biggest slices of humble pie, because I just assumed with my background and in collegiate basketball that I would go out there and dominate. I had it in my mind that I was going to be like the LeBron James of wheelchair basketball. And I get out there for my first practice, and man, within 10, 15 minutes, my hands are just bloody, blistered. because I'd never been in a sports chair before. And I asked one of the teammates at the time, I said, hey man, like, can I wear like gloves? And he's like, well, you can if you're a fill in the explicit in your own imagination. So, and then I tried sitting volleyball, and I was like, okay, you know, these adaptive sports are great, but like, I want to do something kind of more communal too. So, has anyone here in the room heard of one of the nonprofit organizations, Range of Motion Project? So, just high level, what they do is they provide quality prosthetic care to people in countries who typically don't have access to it. And their major footprints in South America, like Guatemala and Ecuador. And so I got to volunteer with them 15 months after my amputation. And that's me right there on Mount Cayambe. And that was at 18,540 feet. I'm terrified of heights and I hate the cold. So the perfect environment, right? And so, you know, what I learned on that trip in particular is like, look, though the United States healthcare system has its flaws, we are still so incredibly blessed in comparisons to other countries. Like literally, I saw a young boy who had a Coke bottle as his socket and a bamboo as his foot. So, you know, we get frustrated at times with what's going on with, you know, different insurance policies and this, that, and the other. And don't get me wrong, like those are real issues and we're going to keep fighting and advocating and lobbying for change in that space. But it really opened up my eyes with how blessed that I was. And another product shout out. So that was around the time when the Autobot Vero socket was relatively new to the market. So I got to take that bad boy all the way up the mountain. And one thing I'll just mention real quick on prosthetic side of things, when you have lymphedema, one of the issues is it's chronic swelling. So for me, socket fit has always been a nightmare from day one. So your traditional carbon fiber socket, you know, this is a fixed circumference, right? There's no flexibility in that. And this is the protocol for most patients, right? And so for me, you know, I could put this on in the morning and it's a little bit loose, and throughout the day as I am active, there could be a little bit of inflammation. But by the end of the day, this socket is no longer freeing me. It is incredibly frustrating because a lot of prosthetists don't really know about true adjustability in sockets. And there's different iterations to it, right? And so for me, when I did a little bit of research and found the Vero socket, to me, that was like a godsend because I can adjust the bottom of the socket and the top of the socket as my limb changes in volume throughout the day. Right now, this is something that I wear for daily use. This isn't something that I would recommend running in. It wasn't what it was designed for. But what's so cool about this design is that the innovation design of the Autobot Vero socket has inspired my prosthetist Dave Rodder in Chicago to basically make me the same version of that. But this is something that I can run in. So it has complete adjustability with the overlapping panels, just like the Veros. Breaking those individual barriers can look very different for each patient. And I had never done a triathlon, and I found myself in this weird like headspace. And they talk about this a lot in like the cancer community, like the survivor mentality where you get that second lease on life and you just start exploring all new activities and things that you may not have done prior to your cancer diagnosis. Or for me, in my case, I had no desire to climb a mountain prior to my amputation, no desire to do a triathlon, and no desire to surf. Yet look at it here. So, and I wouldn't be there without the innovation of technology like this and without the community on social media and in support groups in different prosthetic clinics and in PT and PM&R clinics. And this past October, I got to ride my first wave ever at one of Bethany Hamilton's adaptive surf clinics there. And at the time I was wearing my X3. So again, major shout out to Autobot for coming up with amazing technology that allows us to push our limits. So again, this is a quote that one of my mentors told me when I was very young. And it didn't resonate at the time because I was still trying to discover my purpose in life. I was still trying to figure out, okay, you have this disease, lymphedema. You're told all the things that you will never be able to do. And how do you respond to that? And as I've gotten older, I realized that this quote has just really rung true, not only in my personal journey with lymphedema, but now even more so with someone as navigating limb loss. So the purpose of life is discovering your gift, but the meaning of life is giving that gift away to other people. So I've had the unique pleasure of being in medical device sales, but actually getting to be a patient of the products that I represent before actually selling them. So again, it's just going into a doctor's office or going into a patient's home and say, hey, like this has worked for me personally. So that was me on the left-hand side when I used to sell lymphedema pumps. And then now transitioning over to the other device, that's another one that I do. And I'm contracted with the VA. And I joke that like having the amputation was like one of the best things that happened for me professionally, because there's like this instant camaraderie when I walk into a veteran's home or when I walk through the VA halls. And every now and then a veteran will like come up to me and say, oh man, what happened? And I'll just like, this is a joke. Let me preface with that. I'll say, man, nom. And be like, you look a little young, Grandma. You seen the movie Benjamin Button? I'm actually 78 years old. And I got another quick joke for y'all, because levity has been like so important for my recovery. So what is the last thing that my orthopedic surgeon told me as she was wheeling me back to the operating room for my amputation? Get out of here. Get out. And we're cut off. Literally cut off. Okay. But I'm lunch. Next slide. So again, for what you guys are doing here at Autobach is my goal and my hope for all of you is to find that intersection of the 3 P's where your passion, your purpose, and your profession intersect. And again, realizing that your passion is probably going to change over time. Like, remember earlier when I was a little kid, I wanted to be in the NBA. Well, that's not true anymore. And my purpose that has been evergreen is always to serve other people in whatever capacity I can, because my goal is not to share my story for my own notoriety or fame. I've done that role and it actually led me into a deep spiral of depression. My goal is to share the feedback that I get from awesome devices like the X4, like the Veros, so I can mentor other amputees who are trying to navigate, okay, what do I do when I feel like my prosthetist isn't listening to me? Well, you're not in a marriage to that individual. Shop around, right? So, and then the profession is, it's got to be more than just the money, right? You got to be fueled by the other 2 P's that will lead you into that spot of happiness. And just in closing, before I open it up for a few questions, one of my buddies, Nick, who's also an amputee and a prosthetic tech, makes these wicked awesome prosthetic covers. And so this was actually the stock X3 cover. He called it the Caminator leg because it was inspired by the Terminator. And then this one right here, by a show of hands, who remembers the movie The Rocketeer? Yeah, cool. So the guy with the jetpack. So this front panel is the same as the Rocketeer. And then the side panel here is Matthew McConaughey's spacesuit from Interstellar. So just a really cool service that this guy does for the community. He does them 100% free. They're all custom. And so for me, what this did is, I can go out in public and, as you can see, I wear scrubs every day for work. And I wear adaptive scrubs, so my prosthetic is visible because I like having the conversations. I like educating the little kid in the grocery store who's like looking at it and staring like, what the heck? And, obviously I'll get permission from the parents, like, hey, like, let me just give them a quick little rundown on prosthetics, right? And one of the things that I'll never forget, it was so beautiful. I have a 3-year-old niece in Houston, and she is so obsessed with my prosthetic. And when she sees me every time I walk through that door, she points at it and she just calls it a leg, because to her, it's normal. And I think that being able to plant that seed in a young child's heart is going to make her a more empathetic and sympathetic individual. So when she goes into the classroom, she's not weirded out by maybe having a classmate that may have another mobility challenge or another disability. So again, it's been a true blessing to walk into this space. And, don't get me wrong, there's good days and bad days. And I'll close with this. This past Sunday, doing the 10K with the Autobach team, when Stephanie and C asked, we're good. It's Autobach. They can handle the prep. That better be able to. But when Stephanie and team asked me to do the 10K, I had never done a 10K before. I don't like running. And I just said, okay, sure, I'll do it, right? Without really thinking about my why. because I hadn't trained. And honestly, there was only a couple of weeks till the race, so I didn't really have an adequate amount of time to like really dial in my running blade and be ready for distance that long. But I'm like, okay, I have this awesome new X4, and there's some cool features I want to test it out there. But okay, we'll do it. So after she invited me, the next weekend I was back in Houston at Memorial Hermann Tier, the rehab facility where they had a patient support group for limb loss and limb difference. And there was this young girl, 17 years old, who just lost her leg 2 months ago to osteosarcoma. And her vulnerability and her courage and her faith in that moment of someone who just entered into our community, I'm like, that's my why right there. And that's been the beautiful thing about being in not just the lymphedema community, but now the limb loss and limb difference community. Every single day, I get a front row seat to the resilience, to the grit, and to the inspiration that these young men and young women, and even men and women of all ages, display. Not just to be the inspiration for everybody in the world, but sometimes you have to inspire yourself to wake up every morning, to put on your prosthetic, to clean your liner, and to go and check your mail, and to bathe yourself. And so when it got to the final mile of that race, I was like, okay, something was just really stirring in my spirit. I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this for Ava, let's meet her where she's at. She hasn't got her first prosthetic yet. So whipped off the X4, threw it to my buddy who was my leg caddy, as I called him, and had the forearm crutches and finished the race in that fashion, kind of as a head nod to her. But I'm really excited to go to the running clinic in San Antonio here in a couple weeks. And again, it's been an honor to chat with you guys here today. So we have a couple of minutes for some questions. Is that cool?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to thank you for being here. That was awesome. Thank you for telling us your story, your experiences, and just amazing. So thanks so much. But I bet we do have some time. Before we get going, I just want to tell you, Cam kicked, I think everybody who's here in the room other than like Russ and JP and Trevor, he beat us all at the captain. Did an incredible job. I kept saying, "Where's Cam? Where's Cam? We ought to go to catch up to him now." And he was just blowing us away. It was
I was just trying to use donuts.
I know. It was super cool, super inspirational. Brought lots of awareness to the community. So I want to thank you for doing that with us and participating. So when we open it first of all, we have about 25, 30 people here in the room, I think, last I counted. And then we got 75 last I heard on the phone. So, I mean, so you got 100 people in attendance right now, which is super cool. So I really love that. So any questions from here in the room?
We have two in chat right now. First one is from Cassandra. Have you only tried Ottobock products?
No, I have not. And I don't know what the protocol is on naming other products. Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay, so my first microprocessor knee was a Nocer. And look, like as part of being in the amputee coalition, like I try to be pretty diplomatic and bipartisan on that. And I just encourage patients that look, like when you're shopping for a car, you don't just go and get a Prius because your surgeon says, go get a Prius, right? Like you have to really advocate for yourself. And for me, like I'm one of the patients who is going to connect with other amputees who are doing high functioning activities. And I'm like, I want that leg. So when you guys were teasing the X4, I'm like, I want that leg. So yes, my first leg was a Rio, had that for about a year, and then transitioned to a temporary X3, and then by a miraculous power, I was able to get the X4 this past August, and I've loved it ever since. And one thing I'll say, doing the the 10K last weekend, when there were parts of the course that were pretty steep downhill, like the downhill descent was so smooth on this, and I had no blistering on my residual limb at the end of that race. So the energy return was awesome. The walk to run feature was the smoothest I've ever experienced. And that was going from a Rio to an X3 to now an X4.
Whoa. This kind of leads into the next question from Aaron. Did you experience any pushback getting your X4 covered by your insurance?
Yes. So, at the time I was living in Houston, and Dave Rotter, if you guys don't know him, he's like a legend. He's in the Chicago area. He was initially out of network, but I have an amazing TM&R doctor in Houston, Dr. Benodia, who wrote basically a letter of medical necessity because, again, with my lymphedema, there's not a whole lot of prosthetists who are qualified to make a truly adjustable custom socket like that one, which again was modeled after the Barrows. So I did get an out-of-network exemption to see Dave. And then by the time I saw Dave, he's great at documentation, and my PM&R doctor's great at documentation. And so they were able to draft a letter of medical necessity to my insurance provider. I only had to do one round of appeal, and it was overturned within 2 days, which I get it is typically unheard of. So I feel incredibly blessed to have this leg.
Awesome. There are two of the same question that came through from Lorraine and Jackie. People are fangirling. They want to know if Hannah from The Bachelor ever reached out and apologized.
Do you want me to be honest?
Yes.
So when the amputation happened, it did get a lot of national attention with different media outlets. And I went on Ben Higgins and Ashley Iconetti's podcast. They have Almost Famous podcast, and it's one of the more popular Bachelor Nation podcasts. And that question came up, like, Cam, like, we've been doing this for a while, and you arguably got one of the worst edits we've seen after just getting to know you in person and like understanding the severity of the disease that the network frankly villainized you over. Like, terrible. We're so sorry that happened. Having said that, had any of your castmates, like the guys who threw you under the bus, or has Hannah herself reached out to you? At that point, no, they hadn't. After that episode released, 2 days later, I get this long DM from Hannah. And, some personal stuff in there, so I won't like give that tea. But, I'm glad she hit it. But as I've gotten older, just with wisdom and maturity, is like, we can't navigate our lives, especially after being in the public spotlight like that, expecting everybody to like you. It really made me focus on taking inventory of the people in my life who I actually cared about, who actually love me, and who I want to serve. And so I really don't associate with that group of individuals. It honestly kind of felt like the cafeteria of Mean Girls. And I just, reality. I wish Hannah well. I wish everybody else in that franchise well. But I tell people all the time who ask, if you had to go back, would you do it again? I'm like, well, I'm a very different person now than I was. But, I think that was part of the pruning process, pun intended, for me to get to where I'm at today. And, with my faith that I have now, would not have been a good idea to try to date one girl with 19 other dudes.
I think I saw, did Jenny give a shout out? I think I saw it pop out in screen also. So
I love Jenny. I was talking to her earlier in the morning. Yeah. Hey, Jenny. Yes.
So we often hear like little kids are always going to be the most curious, right? And so when we talk with other people that have come in, they always reference the conversations they have with children. But I'm curious if any adults ever get curious, or if you just see them like side-eyeing you at the airport stuff. Does anybody come and approach you?
Every day.
Yeah.
And again, I welcome it. But when I'm like mentoring other amputees, I'm like, hey, here's how you, well, first off, it's going to be unique to you, and it's going to be circumstantial, right? Like, if you're in a rush and you have to be somewhere, you don't have an obligation to divulge one of the most personal things about your life. Because again, a lot of people who experience limb loss, that could have been one of the worst days in their entire life. Like Jenny, prime example, terrible motorcycle accident, lost her husband in that. So when people come up to her and ask what happened about her leg, like, I get that she may not be in the right headspace that day or that moment. So I tell that to patients all the time, like, you don't owe anybody anything. However, if you're feeling in a heart posture that you want to educate and inform, great, have your elevator pitch for it. And then if you're feeling kind of sassy and you want to have a fun story, like, have those too, right? So I kind of like have a couple in my back pocket. But one thing, I'll never, because I work at the VA, I'll never steal valor. So I'll never claim to be a veteran. I get that almost daily because I look like a veteran. I guess because I'm bearded and athletic, they just assume, and that my prison ministry nickname and my nickname at the VA is Lieutenant Cam. Yeah. So, but like for kids, for example, like, kudos to brands like Barbie and all the other toy manufacturers who are making amputee Barbie dolls. So like, I got my niece one of the Ken dolls with a prosthetic. and one of my other best friends that has some little kids around that age, and they call it their Uncle Cam doll. So yeah, so we're changing the narrative more towards acceptance and inclusivity. And one of the favorite brands I've partnered with is No Limits, which is the adaptive jeans and pants. And they have these awesome shirts and hats that says disability is not a bad word. So I rock that a lot of times when I'm out in public. Change the stigma to it. Yeah.
Can you describe, out of curiosity, the sensation, the pain sensation of lymphedema? What does it feel like? Does it feel like a you got Charlie horse, or is it different? Is it on the skin, or
for me, it's not surface level. It's much deeper. So again, I always go back to the example is like, have you rolled your ankle before or sprained? You know, it's really like deep and it throbs.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. And
on the whole leg?
Throughout the whole leg, in this case in my residual limb. And I was, I guess, fortunate enough when they did my amputation, they also did TMNR. You guys know that targeted muscular reintervention, where they basically attach those nerve endings to my hamstring. So I've never been an amputee without that. So I don't really have a point of reference of how bad my phantom pain or phantom sensations would have been if I had it. But I'll be honest, I still get it. It didn't like cure it. So again, the challenges that I still face today is I'll still get some inflammation. Like after the 10K, like, this residual limb was barking. I had to get a little Epsom salt bath and take care of that. And it has changed my mentality. Again, I was saying earlier, our culture has said no pain, no gain. That couldn't be further from the truth when it comes to prosthetic socket fitting. Pain is often a bad indication. So I just encourage patients to, speak up to that. And it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a wuss. And if your prosthetist is not listening to that and is being kind of dismissive, take your business down the road. Yeah. Yes.
You're wearing Explorer, which is arguably the most sophisticated microprocessor knee on the market. From your perspective, what would you see as like the next frontier? So, for example, there are powered or active knees out there. Do you buy into that, or do you think that, what's your vision if you were to design one?
Great question. And I had the perfect answer.
Totally to the perfect.
Right. Okay. So earlier this year, you guys may have saw the press release with Tesla. They released the Optimus robots, fully autonomous robots. Now, these robots have 4 extremities and AI integrated, and these robots are like wicked smart. It's like iRobot, like coming to life, right? And what they were talking about in that press release is that when they want to mass that to the market, they were saying that it's going to be priced around $30,000. And immediately my heart sank, because I'm like, you're telling me a fully autonomous robot with 4 extremities of brain, visual recognition, and can do like your laundry and dishes and can provide companionship is substantially cheaper than my microprocessor knee? Like, what's going on there? So my hope and prayer is that with innovations in robotics in general and biomedical engineers in different universities across the world, that there is this new standard, this new bar that's being raised. And obviously Autobot has done that since the beginning. Like, you guys are the pioneer in that space. So like this X4, like I can see that in 3-5 years being completely obsolete, with you guys leading innovation and other competitors or other companies that you guys may be potentially to acquire to ultimately make it a better experience for the end user.
And I'm happy to I really do genuinely want to pick your brain on this, because obviously there's a cost element to it, but from a functional perspective, do you feel like you would want something where it, again, it's so sophisticated that it's almost arguably predictive, right? Or instantaneous responses. And so do you see that something that you'd want something to propel you, or, something that is, again, from a functional perspective, I'm trying to envision it. How would AI help you with that need?
So for this setup, obviously I don't have a microprocessor foot and ankle. I think that would be cool, but obviously the more components you add, generally it gets heavier.
Yeah.
So if they're able to find the way to make those joints lighter and more functional to where, because this is one thing that was really shocking to me when I first put on my first microprocessor leg. I was exhausted the first couple weeks because my brain is having to process a lot more, thinking about every step. Even though like that was one thing in my process, trust the prosthetic, trust it, trust it, trust it. Right. But that's like someone saying, hey, I'm about to punch in the face. Don't tense up. Don't tense up. Don't tense up. So my hope is that with AI and more sophisticated robotics, it can take away some of that guesswork so it feels more natural. Because right now, even with the X4, it doesn't feel exactly like my previous knee does. It's close. We're getting there. But that's, again, what's going to raise the bar and innovation for you guys, hopefully to lead the way in that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And with all the pain you had prior to the amputation and with the knowledge you have now and obviously living a great life, would you have wished that you've done the amputation earlier?
Ooh, good question. Now, no one's ever asked me that. So I'll put it to you this way. Short answer, yes, because the more time you have in the prosthesis, typically the better you'll get in responding to it. I don't know if that would have made me more of like a through the knee versus above the knee. And obviously, like I was saying earlier, the longer the residual limb, typically the more functioning you can have to it. And I know a lot of amazing through the knee amputees who like are amazing trail runners. And so that's still like activities I'm having to navigate because going through that femur is still tender. And so we'll see how I fare in the San Antonio event. But yeah, I guess if I did have, a time machine, we can go back and do that earlier, like 2 or 3 years prior, I would have loved to have avoided those episodes of osteomyelitis and the hospital bills and trying to advance my career and relationships, but they kept being sidelined. It would have been nice to be a little bit more proactive with that, but hindsight's 2020. Yeah.
All right. Was anything else online?
Nope, that's it.
Any other questions in the room? So what's your next adventure? Surfing, mountain climbing, triathlon?
So I wouldn't say triathlon again because I just can't stand the running side. But on the topic of running, I will be at the Autobach Running Clinic in San Antonio later this month. And then after that, I'm going back to Bethany Hamilton's Adaptive Surf Camp. And they're doing that in Waco at the Waco Surf Orange. So I'll be local for that. But then beyond that, I'm just kind of I'm not doing the Climate Range of Motion project this year. I think I'm done with mountain climbing in general. So I'm open to suggestions and just really any way I can be of service to the communities where I want to position myself in. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you.